Hello, and welcome to the Authentically Elisa podcast, Unmasking Your True Self. I'm Elisa Bogarts, your guide on this journey to discovering the most genuine version of yourself. Each episode is a step towards unveiling the incredible power that lies within you as we strip away all the shoulds and shine a light on the coulds. Together, we'll explore the path of self-empowerment, self-confidence, and the courage to be unapologetically you. Thank you for being here. Welcome to today's episode. Today, we're going to be talking about somatic healing. And I have an amazing guest with me, Mary Struzinsky. Mary is an award-winning licensed therapist and somatic coach with 30 plus years of experience. She's the creator of Exhausted to Energize and Empowered program, blending results-oriented coaching and transformative therapy techniques. She is co-author of 2 books and a compelling speaker, sharing her poignant story of overcoming burnout. Hey, Mary, thanks for coming. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today.
You're very welcome. So tell me, so how did you get into this field of work and what kind of your path was and just why you're so passionate about it?
Well, it's a funny story because I actually knew what I wanted to do, I think all the way back in 5th grade. I
No
I
way.
knew I wanted to be a therapist when I was like 10 years old. Uh,
Wow.
I just think, I had some traumatic things happen in my childhood growing up, but I think it made me very empathetic to others. So I had a real desire to help others. And it did start working with children and children that were in foster care. And then I eventually became executive director of a national human service agency.
Oh,
And that's
wow.
when I started getting interested in private practice and really specializing in trauma. So, yeah, I'm pretty passionate about it.
Amazing. And when, because you kind of talked about how um in your bio about this sort of like your experiences of burnout that you had and kind of like your path to recovery that maybe sort of like influenced how you kind of got to where you are. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I had been with the company for a long time, started as a mom and pop, but got purchased by a large corporation. And I kept moving up as the company grew, which was wonderful in a lot of ways. I had a good paying job, lots of perks. I did have a lot of flexibility to make sure I could make it to my kids' events and things like that. But as time went on, I just was getting really burnt out. I was traveling a lot, working a lot of hours. But the one thing I think people don't realize is that burnout, it's not really about how many hours you're working. I know some people who, like a doctor, right, who works a lot of hours, but I know this person and they're very passionate about what they do. They love it. They don't feel burnt out. So there's usually another piece there in terms of I don't think I was happy anymore either. I felt like our values were not aligning. And so I really like to make sure people know that burnout is really about being physically, but also emotionally and mentally exhausted. In fact, I work with women who don't even work, like not in a formal job, right? Some may be retired, they're caring for their elderly parents. So burnout doesn't just have to be about how many hours that we're working, but basically what happened to me was I started having physical issues and I even lost the vision in my left eye at one point in time.
Wow.
They thought I had multiple sclerosis, and fortunately, that's not what it was. But they
Yeah.
said the nerve in your brain is literally so inflamed that it's blocking your vision. So that was a
Crazy.
sign.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Yeah. So that was a sign. And I actually didn't even listen to it, believe it or not. And here I am a therapist, right? But I always say, even as a therapist, we cannot always be objective about ourselves. And when I finally did make the leap from corporate back into private practice, I really had to take a good look at myself and kind of ask myself, like, what was going on with me
Mm.
that I didn't feel like it was okay to prioritize my health, to put myself first. And instead, I was so focused on being responsible for my staff and clients and my family and people pleasing, uh,
Right.
that I really had to say, yeah, some of the burnout circumstantial, but I think there's probably a lot more I could take control over that I wasn't.
Yeah.
And then I started seeing women, like woman after woman in private practice who specializing in trauma. People would come to me specifically for that. But then I was seeing how this was playing out in their adult lives. And I kept seeing the burnout and the exhaustion, the overwhelm, uh, perfectionism and procrastination. And that's when I just knew. I said, I need to get the message out to more people that not only did I want them to know maybe there was more going on with them, just like with me, but also that I knew there was tools out there. I knew there was things that I had for solutions that could help them. And that's really when I made the jump into coaching.
Nice. Yeah. Oh, it's so true everything you're saying about burnout. And sometimes it can even just be, just paying attention to your body, like you were saying. Like I know, like in times when I've been in corporate and there's been like I remember once actually there was some exercise that we did about do your career and kind of scale the ups and downs of it when you were like loving it and then when you like weren't loving it. And it was kind of like this ups and downs. And then it was like, okay, well, trying to chart like what was happening at those times. And I noticed with me, it was very much aligned with the people that I was working with. So if I
Uh,
was in like a toxic environment or I had like a really bad manager or something, like it would was super low down. And then I would notice that like my eyelid would start twitching. And like I know
yeah,
whenever my eyelids start twitching, I'm like, oh, like what's going on right now? Like I'm super stressed about something. And I think that that's sort of like the beginning of burnout for me when I like noticed that. And probably I'm probably already into it a bit. But like that's kind of like my first like real telltale. My body's like, hey, like this isn't good. And then other times where it was high was like when I was working in an amazing team and like we're also like everybody was gelling and there was like good synergy and yeah, so I thought that that was just really interesting how really it was the people I was surrounded with that hugely affected who I was. And maybe the work was the same. And yeah, you're right. In the times where it was high, we had a great team. Maybe I was working more hours and didn't feel burnt out. And other times I was working maybe
yeah,
less hours, but feeling that stress and feeling that burnout. Um, yeah, I really like that you said that because people just think that's it. Like you're putting in too many hours, you're not taking care of yourself, but there's more
yeah.
to it.
It really is prolonged stress for long periods of time. And, our bodies, we're in, modern technology now, but our bodies are still built from our ancestors. And they're meant to go into a stress response, but for short bursts. So we can handle the emergency and then all the adrenaline and cortisol is supposed to go back down. But we tend to live in this 24/7 heightened state, and stress response. And all that cortisol and the hormones, stress hormones, the adrenaline, it really takes a toll on our bodies.
Yeah.
And now they know that people who have acute stress for prolonged periods of time and or have had some trauma in their past that maybe is not completely healed or released, that they see that now as inflammation. And
Hmm.
medical doctors are now being trained. Even if you see somebody in their 50s, please ask them what have they been through in their past where they were under prolonged stress? What happened in their past that perhaps was traumatic for them? Because we know that that inflammation builds over time. And that is what they're finding actually leads a lot of times to people having autoimmune disease and heart attacks and diabetes even is all the inflammation in our body. So it's a serious issue. I don't think people realize like just how serious it is for our health.
Yeah, yeah, and it also, like, it's become almost sort of normalized to
Yes.
be in this level of stress that you're just like, "Well, this is just how I operate," and you're like, "Well, it's not good."
It's encouraged even.
Mm.
And I think oftentimes, I know that's what kept me where I was for such a long time. And I see it with other women that I coach, which is that we're conditioned to, you know, be in the hustle mode, to not feel our feelings, right? It's like, how often was it like, oh, I don't feel well today? And it's like, oh, well, too bad. Like, stuff that down and keep on going. And I think many women will come to me and say, I feel like it's something deficient about me. It's like, why can't I deal with the stress? There must be something wrong with me that I can't. And I hate that they put more blame onto themselves, because it's not necessary. And a lot of times their body is just they're just being human. they're they're being human and having a human response. And that's all it is. They just don't know all the tricks yet.
Right.
But yeah, we're really taught not to feel our feelings, or I think a lot of us also grew up, I think, hearing comments from parents like, can you go watch TV right now? Like I'm trying to work, or, you're bothering me right now, or you're overreacting. And when we're young, we sometimes take that in and attach a meaning to it. And then that meaning becomes, oh, like I'm bothering people if I express my feelings. If I even get in touch with my feelings, I don't want to express them. And so, we take those messages with us into adulthood. And I think a lot of times, because they're subconscious messages, we don't know that that's playing in the background a lot of times.
Yeah, it's so true, and it's so interesting how, as we kind of, like, do this transformational work and get coached and kinda go on this journey, how that can be sort of revealed, like, even with me, yeah, as well, like, I kind of sometimes have a story or maybe from the past of that, because I was the youngest of siblings, and so as if I was the annoying one, and so I was kind of like thought that so I think I kinda have that story even now of being annoying, and so therefore I always thought that my what I say and therefore my voice is annoying, and people have told to me with this podcast, they're like, "You've got a great voice, you've got such a perfect voice for podcasting." I was like, "Do I? I always thought that my voice was annoying." Right? And it's just like, "Oh, right, that's an old story that maybe I can let go of."
Yes, isn't that amazing? I mean, I think a lot of people don't know that, 95% of the subconscious drives 95% of our actions, and we don't even know about them. And so, um, if we can get in touch with those beliefs, it can really help. If we're able to bring it to our conscious awareness, that's when we can then make a change and make a shift. It is possible. It's just that we don't always know that that's what's playing out. And when I switched to coaching, I got a business coach because I was trying to go from my brick and mortar private practice to online. And that is a learning curve, I will say. Uh, but
Huge.
she kept saying, why are you playing so small? Like she could feel resistance from me, but couldn't figure out why, especially because I had a business. But it was when we started talking about hiring people, and I could feel myself getting triggered. It's like you with the eye twitch, right? Like I sensed something in my body and it was very uncomfortable. And I paid attention and I realized that's what it is. I didn't
Mm.
want my business to grow because I had this message telling me, if you grow, if you get busy, if you have a lot of clients and thrive, you might get burnt out again. And I
Mm.
was so fearful of losing that time freedom, but also my health, because I was in a good place and everything stabilized or reversed, and I just did not want to go back there again. And so I had to really make the shift that, okay, just because my business grows doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be overwhelming or stressful. It can look any way that I want it to.
Right.
And that was very liberating. So, yes, tapping into the subconscious is a really, what I feel is a really important piece. Mindset work is also a very important piece to a lot of personal growth issues. But what I find is that oftentimes people will come to me and they'll have some coaching tools, but they're stuck. They're just not able to make use of them because there is something stopping them, whether it's fear or the subconscious beliefs. Um, they're stuck, and it's not until we're able to figure out what is the subconscious telling you that you don't know it's telling you, but let's find out, because once we know and can change that, then it's amazing how quickly they're able to make progress after that. It's like they're free and they just take off. It's a very fulfilling thing to see, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just, it's just so powerful. And I think that, yeah, that everybody needs a coach and everybody needs to, yeah, someone to kind of help them with that. Because yeah, it's so hard to do. And you're right. Even if you do have some, you're like, oh, I journal or I do this or I do that, it may not be working because yeah, there is this blockage that you don't
Yes.
even realize is there. Yeah.
Yes. It's not something common that people are educated about, right?
Hmm.
Or even that people will think, well, even with myself, with the burnout, for me, it was a very old message from literally like 40 years earlier. And I'm thinking that's all been resolved and taken care of. And in the end, that really was not the case. There was still something there that hadn't been processed that I think led me to feeling like I had to be overly responsible. Um, so, yeah, I think people need to know that, or even understanding what those things could be. Yeah, sometimes I think people think trauma is sexual assault, being in war, life threatening situations. But like the example I gave earlier, it's just somebody saying to you, you're bothering me right now. Well, depending on the level of coping skills you have at the time, that could be seen as traumatic for somebody.
Right.
Um, so I don't think everybody knows about what we call like little t trauma and big T trauma and the difference. So I actually don't use the word trauma a whole lot. Like if I'm posting on social media or sending out an email, just because I don't think there's, you know, a large portion of people still who don't really know what that means. And so they wouldn't identify themselves necessarily
Right.
with that word. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when you were making that sort of transition and realizing the burnout and making that pivot into your private and going into coaching, I'm sure there was something about authenticity and like what that kind of meant for you at that time and maybe like a bit of a realization like, oh, maybe that wasn't the authentic me and now I'm in this new position like or this new place in my life. How can I be authentic as like who I am now? So yeah, what does like authenticity mean to you? What did that look like?
Yeah. I think as I was realizing that burnout, like I said, I had a part in that, in the exhaustion, and not realizing how much energy goes into being somebody else, not being ourselves actually takes a lot of energy.
Yeah,
People pleasing takes a lot of energy. It's exhausting.
so exhausting.
Trying to be perfect, right? Trying to be perfect. Dealing with procrastination. So all those things that we do that it's self-sabotage that also comes from the brain. But all of that self-sabotage is exhausting. And so for me, it became really important to help other people to be free of some of that because I really felt like that alone will unlock so much energy within them. And I really do believe that like 99.9% of people's happiness goes back to how authentic they're able to be, just to be themselves and not worry about what other people think of them. Um, and for me, authenticity is being in touch with our emotions and our feelings and not shoving it down, like I was mentioning earlier, and feeling like we really can express that to other people in an honest way and at least ask for our boundaries to be respected. That may not always be the case, but I want people to feel free to make the request, because all of that, I think, is what brings the happiness and the energy into our lives.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, because it's just so much more relaxing when you allow yourself to just be you, right? As opposed to being like, oh, I have to be this way, or I have to do that, or do this. And like you were saying with the people pleasing, it's like, especially if you have so many people in your life and you're trying to please everybody, that's just, can be impossible because yeah, you can get it mixed up
Yeah.
and you can just like, you're just constantly second guessing everything and trying to running around sort of a chicken with your head cut off, trying to please everyone. And it just,
Oh, the overthinking that goes along with that. I think about sleepless nights that I had or that I know my clients have. There's a lot of other things that go along with that. And what a lot of people may not know is that underlying most of those things, like perfectionism, procrastination, burnout, underneath all of that is a fear of some sort. We're
right.
running from something that, we're afraid of. And so no, you're not going to be able to be authentic if you're fearful and running from something.
Right. Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, and it can be, yeah. And I think I love that is like kind of digging into being like, well, what could that be? And I'm sure that somatic healing is a way of doing that, right?
Yes, yes. And so, I make it sound so easy, like, oh, we just figure out what's in our subconscious.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah,
that
tell our
easy.
viewers sort of what somatic healing is, and let's dive into that.
Yeah. And so, earlier I talked about like adrenaline and cortisol and the inflammation that occurs in our body. And so when we're under prolonged stress or we've perceived something as traumatic, if we haven't processed it at the time, or if we didn't have the coping skills to process it and really just release it at the time, that energy gets stored in our body. It literally gets stored in our nervous system. So almost like I'm a very visual person, so I kind of like to think of it as like this little file cabinet in our nervous system. And they actually found that these type of memories actually get stored in a different part of our nervous system
No
than regular
way.
memories. So it's like a separate filing cabinet. Um, and so what happens is when it gets stored, because it hasn't been released or filed in this other spot, then anytime something comes up that feels the same, it doesn't have to be the same situation, but if the emotion feels the same, what'll happen is you will then react to whatever's happening in the moment, along with any memories you have where you experience the same emotion, all comes up with it.
Wow.
So if anyone's ever looked at you and been like, wow, why are you acting like that? Well, it's because both of you probably don't know that you're really not just reacting to what's happening right there in the moment. You're reacting to all those other times. And it's also what keeps those messages coming up for us that hurts our confidence and brings us all those limiting beliefs, right? Like, I can't speak up for myself. Oh, I could never do that. Who am
Yeah.
I to think I could do that, right? Like all these limiting beliefs. And so there's many techniques. Thank goodness for technology that we've just learned more and more about the brain and the nervous system. But the techniques are really meant to activate that part of our nervous system so that we're able to bring up the emotion, but in a very controlled and safe way. Because I think a lot of us do
Mm.
worry about feeling overwhelmed by emotion.
Yeah.
And so it's meant not to be overwhelming, but it's meant to be safe so that you can actually process either the emotion or the memory and be able to kind of set that free once and for all and not have it to keep triggering you. And it's also really about not just paying attention to our thoughts because our subconscious has all this information stored going all the way back. And when we're young, it can attach some kind of strange meaning to things.
Right.
Something happens when we're 6, for example. But these are the things that come up. In fact, they found that 80% of our thoughts tend to be very negative or inaccurate. Um, and that's because the brain is trying to keep us safe. So it is doing its job. It's just trying to keep us safe. But it it doesn't it's not that spirit within us or that higher conscious of ours. It
Right.
doesn't want growth. It doesn't want risk or to come out of the comfort zone. So I really talk to people about learning how to feel their emotions, that emotion is not good or bad. I try not to call it negative or positive. Um, because it's really energy. It's energy that's coming up, and it's coming up in order to tell us something. So it's like having a headache. If we had a headache, we'd be like, oh, maybe I'm dehydrated and I need some water. Maybe I'm tired and I need some rest. Or maybe I need to go to the doctor. But we would listen to the physical symptom and then take action. Well, our emotions are the same thing. It's energy that's coming up because it's trying to tell us there's some kind of action that we need to take. There's a need that's not being met. And so I find that in terms of authenticity, if we can trust in our emotions and feel as though we can be curious about them and not judgmental about them, then we can learn an awful lot about ourselves and then also determine the plan. What does this mean I need? And then what action am I going to take based on that? And people are then able to do it, and they are really being as true to themselves as they can be versus listening to some of those thoughts, which we know 80% of those can be skewed in what
Right.
it tells us to do. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. 80%. That's
It's
incredible.
they say it's about 48,000 thoughts a day.
Wow.
That's a lot.
A lot. Holy.
That is a
Yeah. And I
lot.
notice with myself too that, yeah, if there's something, yeah, like, I mean, I don't, trauma or not trauma, but like something, in the past has happened and it resurfaces in my mind. And sometimes like it'll be triggered by something else, right? Something will happen, remind me of something, and then this memory will come up. And it'll be like you said, sort of like in bed, like thinking about it. And it's like, oh, and then I'm like, okay, like try and go to sleep, try and go to sleep. And then I'm like, actually, this is coming up for a reason. I think I just haven't processed this.
Yes.
Right. It's probably something that was
Oh,
just like shoved it down. So I was like, oh, actually, you know what? I'm just gonna do like a little processing right now. And then maybe I'll be able to sleep. And actually I find that it does get rid of it for that moment. Like, it may come up again or it may not. I'll have to see. This actually just happened last night. I was doing that and I was like, oh, I just like instead of me just trying to be like, stop thinking about that. Being
yes.
like, okay, there's emotions coming up, and I know that this memory's coming up because of whatever else happened. It's yeah, like this trapped energy that maybe is just being like, hey, can you release me now? I've been trapped down here for a while.
Exactly. Yes. And that's what we do to ourselves is sometimes we will we judge ourselves for the emotions that come up. I mean, every day, someone will say to me, "Yeah, this is how I felt." And but isn't that's so stupid or it's so
Mm.
silly. And I'm like, "No, don't do that to yourself," right? That negative reinforcement. Um
Right.
Try to not be judgmental, and get curious about it. Because, like with your eye twitching, I loved that you paid attention to the pattern, what was happening each time that took place. You knew that was trying to tell you something, and that's excellent.
Mhm.
But I also don't want to give the brain too much of a bad rap here. And I do tend to do that a little bit, but there is a way to really work with it and say, like, okay, I'm not going to buy into every thought that I have anymore. I'm going to challenge it a little bit. But you really do also want to make friends with your brain and say, I understand that you are trying to keep me safe, but I think at this point it's crossed a line and you are actually now holding me back, and so I may listen to my emotions this time around instead of just my thoughts. But we're not just resisting it, because when we resist it, sometimes it gets louder on us. It doesn't like to be ignored. So
Right. Yeah.
doesn't like to be ignored. But yeah, I think that's a very different concept than what most people have been taught, is to listen to your gut, trust your intuition. And sometimes we've had things happen in our lives that have made us not trust our feelings and emotions. Um, but also, there's ways to really regulate our nervous system. So, if being authentic is hard, for example, if being ourselves seems scary, then there are very simple techniques to regulate our nervous system. And it can range from tapping, for example, which they have found, not only did they find it can relieve physical pain, but they then found it can also help to release emotional pain as
Oh,
well.
nice.
And so tapping in certain meridian points can really help you to regulate, to bring down that flight, fight, or freeze stress response. And then you are able to sit with your emotions a little bit better. There's ways to activate, like REM, our REM sleep, when
Mm.
we're dreaming. That sometimes can process past traumas, but um, EMDR is a technique where you can replicate that REM sleep. You're awake and you're not hypnotized, you're perfectly conscious, but you're activating some of these memories in a very safe environment, where I can then help you to not only process it, but we are also tapping during that experience to keep your nervous system feeling calm and safe as you go through that experience.
Right
So
on.
there's even, I'm trying to think of a really simple one. Okay, I'll give you an example really quick.
Perfect.
Um, I know not everybody can see me, but sometimes just taking your thumb and your index finger and tapping them together. All right. And then you're going to do it on the other hand as well. And you're just going to tap them together. So you're just going to take your thumb and index finger. It's going to come apart, come together. You can do it with your other hand, and you're going to alternate. And you're just going to alternate. And the reason why that works is because you are using what we call bilateral stimulation, using both sides of your brain. There's a sensory experience of touch. And
Mm.
if you're looking at your hands, then that's also another sense that you're using. And your brain has a really difficult time staying in the emotional brain, as if you're using bilateral stimulation and using one of your senses. If you use all five senses, that's even better. Like smell and touch and sight and hearing. So those two parts of the brain do not work well at the same time. So it can really move you out of this sort of emotional brain where you're feeling the fear. So sometimes I'll have clients who they will just do that. They will use alternating bilateral stimulation just by clicking those two fingers together on each hand and alternating. And that's something you can do if you're sitting in a chair. Maybe you're doing that under the table. But then you're kind of able to calm your system. And maybe if you're in a meeting or presentation or something like that and you're feeling nervous, that's something that can really kind of calm that anxiety and give you the
Nice.
ability to get into problem solving brain. Um, and therefore maybe be more of yourself, say what's really on your mind and not be as afraid.
Yeah. Oh, that's so awesome because it's something that's so easy to do. It's even like, like we're on Zoom all the time. So most of the time people can't see your the lower half of your body. You can do whatever you want with your fingers down
Yes.
here. But even if
Yes.
you are in person in a meeting, for example, like you can put your hands under the desk, or even if you're doing that, like I had like twiddle with my fingers all the time. So I was like, well, if I did
Yes.
this, no one would really know the difference if I had tapped my fingers. And because that can really, because I don't know how many times or I've been in a conversation or in a meeting or something, and yeah, I've gotten into that fight or fight. All of a sudden, all eyes were on me and was like, ah, and or yeah, I didn't say what I wanted to say, or it just came out wrong. And then afterwards, when I'm calm, I'm like, I wish I had said this, like, should have said that, like, why didn't I say this, and then in my brain, I'm like, well, now I'm sounding like an intelligent person, but in the meeting, I couldn't, get my words out. And so that's a great little like trick right there. Cause sometimes people say, doing the deep breathing really helps. But I find sometimes if you're in a meeting or if you have to respond right away, you can't just sit there and, take like 3 deep breaths and then respond. Cause people are sort of like, what are you doing? And then sometimes even that,
Yeah.
like it works, it does work, but sometimes it doesn't work, and so sometimes you need to try something else to help you with that.
Yes. And so what I find is I really like to give people what I call lots of tools in their toolbox because typically there's some that just resonate with them more. They just tend to gravitate towards one more than another. So the more tools they have, they can choose their favorites and the things that work the best for them or just fit for their environment. And so give them the tools and let them pick what they like. Another thing is the vagus nerve. And so that nerve kind of runs all throughout our body.
Mm,
And I will tell people that something that's very easy to do is to hum, but you want to hum kind of low. I don't know if I can do it today. Let's see. But it's kind of like, mm, really getting low in your register to the
mm,
point where you are vibrating in your throat. And the reason is because your vagus nerve comes up and it even wraps around the roof of your mouth
mm,
and it responds to that vibration. And it tells your vagus nerve, it's like a highway. When one direction is like, okay, we need to be in stress response, prepare. And the other one is relax, rest, relax, digest. So when it feels that vibration, it's like a signal to the nerve to kind of reset in that
mm.
moment. So granted, you may not want to do that in front of a lot of people in a meeting either, but
Or on stage or
um,
something.
yeah, yeah. But it is something that, it doesn't cost any money and it's
Right.
easy and doesn't take a long time and can make such a difference in people feeling like they can then take that next step that they need to take. And again, in an authentic way, being themselves and not having to expend all that energy and have that stress hormones and chemicals going through their body, just making them more exhausted. So, yeah, there's definitely lots of easy tools, and I think everybody should know about them, right? Just make life so much easier.
Yeah, yeah, and we went through some today. I think that's like sort of the perfect way for us to start closing because we talked about how our bodies, they're showing us signs and that it's really okay to express our emotions and our feelings. And we talked about somatic healing and some tools about that. We talked about tapping, ERMT. We talked about doing the kind of tapping your fingers alternately, how you can do the humming. Lots of nice little tools of ways to help you get into a calmer state so that you can be more authentic and think more clearly and process emotions. Um, and that, yeah, that you can do it in a safe way as well by bringing up your emotions and processing them. And then we do have these things that I love that when you talk about that, this like, when you react in some way, it's not just in that situation, but it's in so many other situations in the past that are related to it. And so, and in that moment or even afterwards, you can give yourself some compassion and kindness to be like, okay, it was like, I understand where that's
Yeah.
coming from. And then that even can be a sign and awareness being like, wow, I think I have many things that need to be released, all that energy that's being stored in the wrong file. Let's
Yeah.
relocate that file to the proper
Yes.
one.
Yes. Yes.
And to really just trust in those emotions and that they're really trying to tell you something.
Yes, yes. Don't be afraid of them. And I would also say that, I talked about our subconscious, but I want people to know that one of the greatest discoveries was that the brain has neuroplasticity, basically saying that we have the ability to break some of those connections from the past and develop new connections. And so if there's a message that people walk away with today, it's that, to me, that really is proof that we have the ability to change, even down deep into our subconscious. And so if people are struggling with something, it, there are tools out there that really can help. They just don't know about them, and that's not their fault. Um, and they shouldn't feel deficient in any way. Their body is trying to keep them safe, and there's so many ways that we can help people really make changes that are down deep and therefore permanent and long lasting. And then, like, sky's the limit after that, right? I mean,
Right.
it's just amazing. So I just find it to be one of the most hopeful discoveries. And I hope that makes other people feel hopeful too.
Yeah, I hope so. And I hope that's it really inspired them to know that you can make change and you can process things and get over them and rewire and yeah, I think neuroplasticity, it's actually really so exciting to be like, oh wait, I can change that because I'm not I'm
Yes.
not it's not stuck. Yeah.
Yes.
And if it's, a super highway that's been there since you were 2 or something, it may take some time and
Yep.
lots of tools and over again, repetitive, because you think about that, like, even with those repetitive things that we say to ourselves, right? Like, you've been saying that to yourself for years and years and years and years and years, so you need to start showing it the new path or saying something different to yourself in order to change that, and so it takes practice, but
It
it's
does.
possible.
It does, but yes, it is absolutely possible. And give yourself a break. You are human, and even I as myself, once in a while I'll catch myself saying something to myself. I'll be like, "Whoop, okay, where did that just come from?" That didn't sound too positive there, Mary. So it is an ongoing process, but things will become more automatic. It's possible to have a new automatic that is much healthier for you. And so I want that for everybody. I really do.
Me too. Oh, thank you so much for today. So, Mary, where can our listeners find you online?
Well, I recommend they go to starcitycoaching.com, and they can find all my social media links there. And I love it when they reach out to me and email me. And they can do that at marys@starcitycoaching.com. But one of the things I would recommend is when they're there at the top of the page, they will see something that says energized and empowered, and they might be interested in taking a look at my 5-week program. So, if they want to know more about exploring their emotions, but in a safe way, how to work with some of those negative thoughts, we cover that as well. How to regulate our nervous system, we cover all of that. And so I see really amazing transformations in the 5-week period. So, I'll actually be launching it again in May and then again in July, but they can sign up on the wait list, and then they'll know when I'm opening the doors again for that. And then I have
Perfect.
a book coming out on July 15th, so they
Ooh,
should be on the
exciting.
lookout for that as well. So, yeah, lots of
Nice.
good stuff happening.
Cool book. Wow, congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, we're talking again about my burnout experience, but what I discovered in that process, and also how it really helped me to feel more comfortable being visible as I move to coaching and packaging my expertise. So I think in terms of authenticity, again, I think it'll be very interesting for people to just kind of hear how I even had some visibility concerns myself and limiting beliefs around visibility and how I dealt with that. So yeah, so it comes out July 15th, and I'm sure I'll have something on my website about that as well as we get closer.
Awesome. That's just so interesting. You just said that about the visibility because you actually had a vision issue.
Yes.
Then you had a visibility issue.
Yes, exactly. At least I'm consistent.
Right. Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much for being on the show today. This conversation was awesome.
Thank you again for having me. It was great. I really hope it brought some value to the listeners.
Yeah, me too. I think it did. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope it inspired you to live a more authentic life. I'd love your help in inspiring more people to live authentically, so please follow, rate, and leave a review so we can create a ripple effect of authenticity. Until next time, stay true to you, be bold, and thrive on your own terms. This is Elisa, signing off authentically.